Tell me a little bit how songs come together for you guys. Like, what is the initial genesis and how do you guys approach songwriting?
It's changed a little bit album per album, but more recently, for example, the new record and a couple of the last ones, a lot of the time it starts where I'll bring a guitar idea with a vocal melody over top and bring that to the band, and then everyone kind of riffs on it or jams on it. And then from there, we start to get more of like a feeling of where the song can go. And then people will start adding more parts. We'll usually then we actually kind of write in like small piece by piece sections where we start with one idea, and then at the practice, if we get another part written after that, I usually like to stop there so we can take it back, listen to it, and then come with fresh ideas the next time.
Would you say that melody is the starting point of a Dreadnought song?
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to say. It's definitely a melody, and having like that guitar backing is the start of a Dreadnought song. And like on some earlier records, Lauren had, like, for example, Odyssey on Bridging Realms, that song started with her piano part. So it's kind of changed every album, but it's usually one person brings a part, and then we all kind of bring in our ideas on that one part. And from there, we move forward with the feel and the flow. And we like to try multiple things. Like, we try every idea we can, just because we never know what it's going to sound like or what it's going to turn into, which can be a lengthy process, and we throw away a lot of things too. But it is gratifying once you do go through kind of everything you can possibly think of, and then you finally land on something that is the most meaningful.
And you guys work on the arrangements as a group?
Yeah, we do. Mm-hmm.
As somebody who went to school and studied composition, what makes a song? What makes a good song? What's your approach to arrangements and song structure?
I think that's a really hard question, because sure, school can tell you one thing or another, but it's all subjective too. I think what makes a good song is definitely having strong transitions that make sense, and making sure the energy flow between parts works. For example, if you have a melody that's like moving, that's kind of quicker, that usually means like the energy is flowing upwards. So you'll usually kind of move into a more energetic part from there, where like more space in a melody brings down energy. But that doesn't always have to be the rule. It's a really tough question to answer, like what makes a good song, because I don't know. I don't have the right answer. I just do what I do. And I think it's good for me what I do,
Yeah, no, I'm just curious because everyone has their own approach to songwriting, and I know some people are much more almost, I don't want to say fascistic, but very much about a formula about what makes a song and, where chord progression can go from one to another and things like that.
Right.
It's interesting to me, you guys with your classical and your jazz background, that you're much more about flow and not as strict about arrangements or sticking to formulas or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely. We're definitely much more linear writers, because it's kind of about the whole encompassing vibe of a song rather than verse, chorus, which that's not a bad way to write a song, but I don't think that is the way to write a song, or like the ultimate way, even though that's what pop wants you to think. So yeah, I like writing linearly because I think for me, it tells more of a story when you write in that form.
And speaking of stories, we should mention that there is a story going through most of your albums, right? Continuing from one album to another?
Somewhat. So each album kind of has its own story within it, but our albums are generally based off of Zelda temples. That's just like our starting point to get a vibe. I grew up with Zelda playing the game. So we had the Life Woven was Earth or Forest, and then Bridging Realms. What did we do Bridging Realms after? I'm like, it's been so long, The Water, Fire, and then our next album is the Shadow Temple.
Now, this is Zelda as in Legend of Zelda, the Nintendo game, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Why Zelda?
It's just the game that we loved, that we all grew up playing, and it just kind of inspired us. I think the video games themselves are very music driven, which is why it inspired us. And that's really it. It's just part of our childhood and part of who we are.
So let's talk about The Endless. This is your fifth album, and it came out on August 26th through Profound Lore Records.
Yes.
When did you start working on this album?
We started working on this album, I want to say early 2020. The first song, Worlds Break, was written kind of at the start of the pandemic. We actually were writing remotely at first, so I kind of had one of the guitar parts written with like a vocal idea, recorded that, sent it to the band, and then they recorded their ideas over top and then sent it back. So it was kind of a lengthy process at first. But then as the pandemic got, I guess, better, for lack of a better word, like we could, we would be careful and get together and wear masks, and then we could start writing the album more in full. So that's kind of when it started.
And so because of understandable reasons, you guys started working on this remotely. Is that correct? Or with you
yes,
working on it by yourself and sending your ideas to the rest of the band?
Yes. Yeah. That's how it started. And it was like that for just like a month or two. And then we were able to kind of social distance and get together and write together.
And since you guys write as a group, what were those initial sessions or those initial working remotely? What was that period like? Was it difficult?
It was definitely harder than it usually is, but just because you're not there to like talk through kind of different ideas. You have to wait until somebody sends you an idea that you can then import into your software to listen to everything with. So it was a little lengthier of a process than usual. But but it did help us all learn to home record a lot better, which then ended up helping us a lot in the demoing process later on.
We spoke a little bit about how this album is different from the previous albums in the sense that moving away from some of the elements like the flute and the saxophone, which were a big part of your sound early on. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that happened? Was there an intention or a feeling that you wanted to accomplish with this album that those elements didn't make as much sense for?
Kind of. I feel like I don't know if it was like 100% intentional to be like, we got to drop the woodwinds, but I was playing a lot of guitar and just felt the music was the way that I was feeling at the time was having it be really more rock and roll driven and more guitar driven this time around. And then because of that, I just kept writing more guitar riffs and didn't really leave a lot of space for flute. And then also because of that, the drums were kind of required throughout all of it, which didn't leave much room for the saxophone. But there wasn't like necessarily a specific feeling I was trying to acquire by doing that. It's just kind of what felt right at the time. I was listening to a lot of Aranssi Pazuzu, still am. And that probably like influenced a lot of like wanting to play guitar. And I think we did want it to be a little bit darker and slightly less folky too.
Space is something that you guys have mentioned as something that's important to your music. Would you say that in terms of space, this album is a lot denser than your previous albums?
I think in terms of texture, yeah. I think there's more atmosphere in the like post parts, for example, like the end of the Endless. I think it's interesting because I feel like I did want this album to be kind of simpler, but I've had a few people tell me it is like denser. So so it's interesting to hear how people have heard it. But I do think texturally it's dense for sure.
Well, when I say dense, I mean, I think early on you shied away from wanting to describe Dreadnought as a metal band or as specifically as a heavy band, but this does feel like your heaviest or maybe your most oppressive album. Mm-hmm. Darkest, I guess, is how you described it.
Yeah, definitely. I do think it is our darkest album. I suppose it could be our heaviest album. I feel like Emergence was heavy too, but I guess it depends on what you define as heavy. I guess when I say heavy, I think kind of like metal, which. Yeah, I don't know. We have metal in this one too. I like it all.
I mean, maybe not heavy in a Slayer way, but heavy in like an Earth drone kind of way.
Yeah.
Like this does feel like a very kind of hypnotically oppressive album. I don't know how to describe it really.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's like not heavy in the like super riffy way, but in a very like atmospheric, thick kind of way. You can really feel all the layers.
Yeah. Where did you end up recording this album?
We recorded it with Pete DeBoer at World Famous Studios in Denver. He recorded Blood Incantation and Wayfair, to name a couple of other Denver bands. He's awesome. And it was great to work with him on this record. And I think he made it sound really good. Like you can hear everything and it sounds natural. The console he has there is amazing. And yeah, I think he did a killer job and it was great to work with him. So I recommend anybody to work with Pete.
And was this the first time you guys worked with Pete?
This was the first time Dreadnought did. Or no, we actually recorded our single It Took the Flood with Pete back in 2019 when we did the single for Adult Swim. We recorded that song with him. But this is the first full length that we've done with him. And I've worked with him on my other band, Bleak Heart, that recorded a record with him in 2020. So I was already familiar with Pete and his process when Dreadnought went in.
You mentioned his work with Blood Incantation and Wayfarer.
Mm-hmm.
Was his other work a deciding factor in choosing to work with him?
Not really, no. It was actually just, I think it was, we were just mutual friends, and working with him with Bleak Heart really made me want to work with him with Dreadnought too. Just, I think the way that he records the vocals and that all of his analog gear there, I think he just really makes it sound good. And yes, it's like, the BI album definitely I thought sounded really amazing, but I think it was like after going to the studio and like seeing the vibe of the studio and how he works, that's what made me want to work with him.
And how would you describe his approach as an engineer?
He is like, let's see. One thing that was like different working with him than what has been with other people is because he's all about analog. The way that we mixed the album was different than anybody else I've worked with, where because it's all on his analog console, you mix one song a day, and then after that song is mixed, it's done. Like technically you can re-upload the mix to the board, he has to reset all of his settings, but it's not ideal. So that was a really new approach that I haven't been a part of before, and it was really helpful because it helps you to like let go of things and to let go of little details that would otherwise maybe drive you crazy till the end of time. You just have to kind of you finish mixing a song, you listen to it the next morning, and you're like, okay, any changes? Yes, no. If so, make a couple changes, listen to it again, and then you're kind of done from there. You don't go back to fix it and you leave it where it was in that time.